Join us for a journey as we go back to the great civilizations of the past. Who were the people? What were they like? How did they begin and how did they end? Let's find out on this episode of Fan of History.
Hello, Leo. You didn't expect that. It's usually hello, Dan, but today we have a special guest, a recurring guest. We have Leo from Classical Numismatics. I'm pronouncing it correctly. The YouTube channel that's awesome, that I've used so many times when I needed to talk about coins, especially in the first coin episode that we ever did, which was... I should say the first coin episode I did. Dan did one way back in episode 9. And then when I went to Sweden to meet with Enkidu and Dan, we did an episode on ancient coins. And that was episode 154. And I referenced you, Leo, in the podcast, but I didn't at the time have it in front of me. And I didn't say, but I said, there's a guy, there's a great channel. I'm pretty sure I linked it in that episode 154. If I didn't, I'll go back and put that in there. And I used your channel and I used it a lot. I remember driving in the car with Enkidu heading to Stockholm on the 6-hour drive, and in a Volvo in Sweden, listening to ABBA sometimes, which I thought was interesting and fun. And I would listening and watching your videos on ancient coinage, and they're just amazing. And the videos are great, too, because he shows you the coins. You could just see all these coins and really clear and in video, too, not just like museum pictures through a glass, like a person holding the coin. So smart and so good. And luckily, serendipitously, and I like to say thanks to the listeners that I'm able to do this, because I met Dean, who turns out to be a friend of Leo's, and here we are. From 600 BC now to 500 BC, many years later, and now we're going to talk about the state of coins in 500 BC and get us caught up to there, kind of around the world, and that's why we brought in our expert. Again, Leo. Hello, Leo, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me here, Bernie. It's going to be yet another very fun conversation, I'm sure.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you. So, Blake, let's just real quickly go to the beginning, because when I did a show with Dean, and I said the coins were founded around 600, and that's what we did on our podcast episode. But it turns out it could have been a little earlier than that, and I'll just let you go with that, and then just we'll talk about that and go into the state of coins, like we said, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I mean, let's first do this sort of like this gap of time between what we're going to discuss, the 500s BC, and go all the way back to like the 650s BC, because that's an interesting time when coins were a little bit of a novelty, right? They were still sort of like a developing technology. So yeah, it's the consensus that we have, at least right now, is that coinage began in the 650s BC. It was at the region of Lydia, that's modern Western Turkey. It was made out of an alloy called electrum. There was a mix of gold and silver. Coinage started there. And between the 650s and the 550s, the sort of like this new technology was refined. We see the development of designs and the improvement of what we think about as a coin. And then it's important that we talk about a time around the 550s BC. So that's 100 years after the invention of coinage. There was a Lydian king called Croesus. This is where we get the expression "riches Croesus," to say that someone is incredibly wealthy. This man came with the revolutionary idea of making separate coins out of gold and out of silver. This was a major development because this gave a whole lot of extra trust to coins. People could see if a coin was of a certain value, if there wasn't like an improper mix in the alloys. So starting at that time, so between 550 and 500 BC, which is the time that we are going to be talking about, you really see coins beginning to sort of like go mainstream, you would say. You have the Greeks catching up to the idea. You have some of the first city-states Greek city-states adopting coinage, all of the Greek colonies in the western coast of what is modern-day Turkey, the islands in the Aegean. There's some famous examples like the first Athenian coins from an island called Aegina. They had this cute little turtle in their coins. It's a very famous design as well. And so between the 550s and the 500s BC, you really see that explosion. You see the Greeks catching up to this idea of coinage. They absolutely loved it. It became not only this powerful tool of trade, now you had this instrument of standardized weight, standardized design, so people could trust, but you also had a powerful tool for these fragmented city-states to show their images, show whatever they wanted to show, and it would be seen in foreign markets because silver, it's silver. People would have accepted everywhere, but you had the opportunity of making a propaganda of your own city in foreign markets. So yeah, this time of 500 BC, it's interesting because you see these coins really, you see like these important cities adopting and issuing a large number of coins. You see the Athenians with their famous Athenian tetradrachma with the image of Athena and the owl. You see the Corinthians. You see the area that would be Macedon, places like Miletus, and even the Persians. The Persians, as they captured the kingdom of Lydia, they also really liked the idea. They introduced their own coin, the siglos, which was also very popular with the Greeks, and it would be a very important coinage in the context of the later Persian wars. And so, yeah, this period of 500 BC, it's really important because it is the time when coinage really explodes and becomes this sort of like social technology that is used all over the Mediterranean, and it becomes a really big thing.
Like it kind of explodes. You mean it's more people get to use it as well too. Like so from 650 to even 550, or especially the later, or I should say the earlier 500s, later numbers, earlier time. The coins were more. You couldn't buy. They were worth a lot of money. In other words, they were worth like a month's salary or more, and they were primarily used for major trade exchanges, right, and mercenaries for the most part.
Yes, it was like the very first coins. So you had a standard unit called the stater, and then you would have divisions of that stater as like their small change, which wasn't really small. So for example, the very first coins, the ones from Lydia, they went as low as 1/96th of a stater, but and the 1/96th of a stater was a ridiculous coin. It could fit on your fingertips. But even that tiny little coin, it was worth like a week's worth of wages. Wow. So it was really something meant for mercenaries to pay for troops, to pay for entire armies, for important merchants. So it was really something for the elites. That's another very interesting point about the 500s BC that you just called my attention to, because as we get into this time, not only now we have pure silver coins rather than this gold-silver mix, but you also have these smaller silver fractions getting smaller and smaller. So you then start seeing these monetary systems with tiny little silver coins. And now you're starting to get into some manageable sums of money. So if you think about what they call like an obo or a tetarteron, they have some very complicated names. But the point is, by that time, you start seeing these tiny coins hitting the market, becoming popular. People could use it to buy, their groceries or some small items.
So before that, I was laughing to myself. I'm thinking before that, you're a mercenary, and you get this coin, and you make it through the campaign. You're not dead. You get paid, and you go to a bar to get a drink, and you order a drink, and they give you for change 2 sheep.
Yeah, it's either that, or you would have to use that tiny little fraction to buy a round to all your buddies, and then it was their turn to spend their tiny little coin buying another round for everyone else.
So yeah, it just seems it probably was somewhat inconvenient at the time, and that's maybe why it didn't. It's funny that something so useful as a social tool. It was definitely picking up, but if it was really way back in 650 and it was like 100 years, that's 4 or 5 generations of people until they really, starts to boil down into the even 150 years to the more of the, let's, quote unquote masses. So those for those 100 years, they were certainly used as I can't think of something similar in our time frame, but it seems like it was almost like, if you got a fighter jet, like not everybody had a coin.
Yeah, it's like, information traveled rather slowly back then. So yeah, you have this new technology basically that had to be slowly adapted to whatever it was intended to work as. What immediately comes to my mind is, like, for example, in the very early days of Bitcoin, you had one Bitcoin, but back then it was much less valuable. But nowadays you have these fractions of a Bitcoin, which are much more. So you have like 0.00001 Bitcoin, and that's a manageable sum of money. It could be like an analogy. If you only,
no, I think it's a great analogy. I'm so glad you used it.
Yeah,
I think that helps you understand.
Yeah, I want to buy. You could only, buy real estate or cars with Bitcoin.
Right.
You buy something small.
Right. If it was worth $60,000 for you, and you couldn't divide them up. It's easier to divide digital currency than a tiny thing the size of a pebble that's gold. And just to sum up, to remind, because I had just listened to the episode from the 600s, and just remember that coins are like a store of value. So basically a coin, just, if it's a silver or gold coin, gold was worth money and you could trade things with gold, but you had to weigh it and such. And these were basically, to narrow it, to boil it down to simplicity, is a sort of and tell me if I'm wrong, this basically says this coin has this much metal and it's worth this much. It's worth this much money and doesn't have to be weighed and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's one of the appeals of coin, right? It's the idea, and that's actually one of the reasons why coins became a state monopoly so early in their history. There's a lot of questioning if the first coins in the 650s, if they were made by an actual state or if they were made by merchants who wanted to just make a practical a practical piece of metal that was based on whatever weight standard, because there were weight standards that they used way back in like the Bronze Age. So the idea was exactly that. The fact that there is a stamp on the obverse and the reverse means that this was issued by a state. A state is a much more trustworthy, well, not so much, I don't know, but it's a much more trustworthy institution compared to just an individual.
Right.
You could
the tent seller.
Yeah, and then whatever this coin was worth, the state guaranteed that it was of that weight, of that fineness, and that it was good. And of course, the state charged a little bit of a fee on that. That's what they called seigniorage. So typically when a coin is, let's say a coin has 3 grams of silver in it. The nominal value of the coin is going to be 3 grams and a little bit, 3.2 grams. And that little extra, it's going to be, that's where the fiduciary value comes from. That's the little fee that the state charges to issue that coin. This way he makes a little bit of money. It's a bit of a business, really.
It's interesting. It sounds almost like, I really liked that they said maybe some merchant thought of it. I could see, like a ancient corporation of some sort, and guys are sitting in a meeting and so sick of weighing all this, and this guy said it wasn't right. He's like, why don't we just stamp something on it and show that they're the same? And somebody said, that's a good idea, and kind of mad it went from there.
Yeah, one of the very first coins, it has like a little deer, and there's a written, like a little inscription on top of that deer, which reads, "This is the symbol of Farnese. We have no idea who Farnese was. He was probably just a merchant, and that was his little personal symbol. So that's the most likely theory. It's just like this guy was a famous merchant in that area. He made payments with these standard globes of metal. So here is a little piece, yet another piece of metal with his little symbol. So people know, like, oh, this comes from Farnese. That's trustworthy. and there it goes. And the state saw that, and he was like, I can get a little bite out of that. And then they just went with it.
That's so amazing. I wish I knew that 3 years ago or however many years ago when I went to, because I just listened to that episode. That is so awesome. All right, well, I can't make us live back in the past. Oh, obviously we're in the past. That's so funny. We can't live in the past. Because currently we're in the, so we're back in ahead to 550. One little last thing I do recall for the 100 years before we got to 550 through the podcast, how we saw a much bigger explosion of mercenaries, and that must have been why I theorized because of coinage, and now they're able to have mercenaries. Like, for example, Sardis wasn't even Lydian at the beginning, and then they were able to conquer Sardis. I theorized that now they have more Greek mercenaries, and you see more mercenaries and more travel throughout the ancient world, especially with the Greek mercenaries. So I think the coinage was probably had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we analyze the time period, it could have been that the invention of coinage was a reaction to a more complex economy, which had the needs for mercenaries and everything. Because if you think about this time period, so the 650s, you're like in the end of the archaic period, and then you get into like the 500s, the early classical period. I mean, there was a lot of activity in the archaic period, but that transition between archaic and classical, that's when economy really picks up. That's when the cities start to develop into a much larger size. You see bigger wars, you see bigger conflict and larger states and federations. So coins might have been just the natural evolution of a commerce that was becoming more intense.
Yeah, that's true too. That's true. But so then back by the time we have Cyrus the Great, 550, and then we get the Persian Empire, we start to see coins a lot more. Like the Persians have a coin by 520s, and the Greeks have a lot more coins around then we start seeing them, right?
Yeah. I mean, you see coins all the way into like the Western Mediterranean. There's since you mentioned Spain a little bit earlier, there's a colony here. There was a colony here in Spain called Epolitum, and they had some silver coins as far back as the 510s BC.
Okay.
So what does that mean? That means if a city all the way into the Western Mediterranean had its coinage so far back, it probably means that the entire Mediterranean was using this new thing, coins. So it's probably that there would have been coins, in the area of northern Africa, in like Massalia, the southern coast of France. Maybe the Romans, as they were kicking the kings out, they were seeing some coins there as well. It's probable that the entire Mediterranean was dealing with coins and becoming more economically active.
That's so interesting. So then we'll start to break down. We'll talk about some of the coins, because that's your gig, right? That's your thing, is how cool are these actual coins and artistically. But you mentioned when we talked before when we weren't on recording, you mentioned to me how you sort of, anybody who was somebody, or you sort of had to be a player in the Mediterranean at this time, you pretty much had to have your own coin minted. And when you said about Spain, so you meant that city way back out in 510 had coins minted with their city, that not just coins were found there, but they had their own coins in 510.
Yeah, and
wow.
It wasn't even that much of an important city. It was just a small coastal settlement, and they had their own coins.
You know what? Because I did talk about coins so long ago, some listeners could be new, and I'm also saying to people they may want to just start our podcast at 500. Could you just quick tell us some people like us, we're like talking about coins all the time. We assume everybody knows. Like, so an actual physical coin. First of all, they're in these days, they weren't like melted down into a mold and then made into those shapes. They were hard, and then they were stamped with, right? Could you explain to us a little bit how they're made?
Yeah. I mean, there were some cast coins as well, especially in China, but there were some cast coins made in the European area. Okay. Especially in the Italian peninsula, but that's a whole other bag of things. Yeah. Typically what a coin was, so first you had a mold, then you would have like a standard amount of metal that was melted down and put into this mold. It would be, so like I don't know, like there was a standard size for a standard weight. You would pour liquid gold or silver or whatever. Then you would get this. Initially, they looked like little globs of metal, but then eventually they assumed this disc shape. So they would first make this disc of a standardized weight. Then they would heat it up again. They would put it between two metal dies. These dies were hand sculpted, handcrafted with the designs of the whichever city-state was issuing the coin. So you had the obverse and the reverse. You put them two together and the little heated up flan in the middle. Get a nice hammer blow. So you would imprint the obverse and the reverse, as they called them, the heads and tail sides on each end of the coin. And there you had it. You had a struck coin. And there it goes. They were typically struck.
And when was the first coin flipped as a heads and tails? We don't know that, right?
That would be cool. I mean, the earliest ones probably they were not, because they look like literally like little balls.
Oh, right.
But I mean, as early as the 550s BC, you start seeing coins shaped like proper coins. So then they would probably do it. They probably wouldn't say head or tails. They would say something like, I don't know, like bow and random square.
Yeah, right. Something like that.
Some of these were very simple. I can see the Athenian ones doing Athena or owl.
Yeah, right.
But yeah,
that's amazing. The first coin flip. Well, I wonder. We'll have to. I'll get back to you all on that. I'll find out if I can find anything about the first coin flip. Sorry, I always do that. So that's basically what that physical coin is. It's not like, I mean, myself, I would think maybe they just melted them all into shape, but they melt them into size. Then they're hard, and you say they heat them a little bit up again, enough to get them soft enough, and then they slam them. And that's how you get the designs. But some of these designs are super artistic, especially in the Greek ones. I mean, I think we could talk about some of the coins that are the popular, famous coins that are around in the world in this time.
They are. The point is the Greeks quickly caught up with the potential of coins as this tool of propaganda, this tool of just... because coins would go around. The Greeks were great merchants, so they would go to lots of ports all over the Mediterranean trading. So they understood that these coins were going to get very, very far. And one of the best ways of advertising the importance of your city was to make a pretty coin. So that's exactly what they did. A city that had a beautiful or a nice looking and a recognizable design was a symbol that the city was powerful. Because, so for example, one of the most famous, probably the most famous ancient coin, the Athenian owl. It was, so the Athenians had this massive silver mine next to them, the mines of Lorient.
Okay. And
they extracted a lot of silver from there. They made coins, and they used that coin to fund their large population, their huge navy, all of the things that we know Athens is famous for. And their coin was pretty. It called people's attention, and it was very high quality. So one of the signs that their coin and their coin design was very famous and recognizable and well respected was that other peoples started imitating them. So, for example, Egypt started issuing Athenian owls.
Wow, an actual owl and everything.
Yes, they had small symbols that differentiated their coins, their issues from the Athenian ones, like their letters and the owl were a little bit different. But the similarities are so striking that some people even theorize that Egypt bought coin dies, or maybe they hired engravers from Athens to make these dies and issue these coins for trade, because they were just so recognizable. And then all over the Eastern Mediterranean, you have all sorts of different peoples imitating the Athenian owls, striking their own owls, maybe changing the inscriptions that mention from the Athenians to some local inscriptions, maybe making them in their own little standards. And that's one of the main signs that a coin was successful. Not only was found everywhere, but it was it was copied all over. I mean, you have copies of Athenian owls found all the way in Bactria, which is like modern day Pakistan, India, and like some 300 years after the first Athenian owl was made. It was really incredibly popular. And this happened throughout history with all of the popular coin designs. The denarius was copied, the Spanish pieces of 8, the Venetian coins were also copied. If you were a prestigious city, it was very likely that your coin was prestigious. It was accepted everywhere the moment they saw that design, and as like an icing on the cake to see that your coin was really very popular and international, people started copying it. So
if you weren't a big city, you might sort of. It wasn't a counterfeit though. It wasn't like a counterfeit $100 bill. It was just more. It was more of a copying the style, and because maybe somebody who was more, I guess they're all dead now. They were probably not the most. Everybody wasn't real intelligent, right? Or they're intelligent, but they weren't knowledgeable. Let's say. So you know that things with owls on them are money, and you get another one with owl on it, and it came from Egypt. That means it's money.
Yeah, basically, it would be like if some poor country today saw. For some way found a $100 bill, knew that the U.S. was important in the world stage, and found a way for whoever ruled his country to start making their own $100 bill in a very similar design. But instead of having like the Federal Reserve, you would have a central bank of whatever country, and the bill would look like a $100 bill. That's sort of like a modern analogy that we can make.
Okay. It's really interesting. I just learned something new. That's amazing. So Athens, obviously, around this time would have been one of the city-states that issued their own coins. I mean, if we stay in Greece, what's another one? I think it's you pronounced it before.
Corinth.
Oh, Corinth, all right.
Corinth also had a very important design with a shield, with their typical Corinthian shield and a beautiful amphora. There are some cities that we don't talk a whole lot about. There's, for example, a city called Acanthus, which made some incredible coins. You have pretty much every single important city that you think about in ancient history, they issued their own coins. Sparta was a little bit of an exception.
I was going to ask you about Sparta. Let's talk about Sparta.
Yeah, Sparta was really an exception. Basically, they had this entirely different social system, one could say.
Yeah,
right?
Indeed.
And one of the things they did was, since they had pretty much slaves for everything and their system was so centralized, there wasn't really a need for money because every kind of production was done through slaves.
Right, with Fijian, don't kill you, you're lucky. Don't ask for money, too.
Yeah, exactly. So they came up with some sort of money, these weird iron spits, which were made impractical on purpose to push people away from accumulating wealth and thinking about other things other than war and being prepared and being physically fit. So it was a little bit of an exception, but every single major player in the Mediterranean sphere was either striking their own coins or making copies of another important coin made by another important city-state.
All right, so we'll go around some of the states. That Spartan thing is just so interesting. So they used metal bars because it was more like practical metal, right? Like way before there was trade, using gold as a value, as a store of value, people would trade things like copper and bronze,
commodity money,
and things like that. And it's a commodity. So the Spartans made it as their iron was sort of like a commodity, and they were just tough, and they didn't want people to hoard the money, is what I read, and that's what you said. That's really, they're definitely different. But then around the rest of there were some really. So we know the Athenian owl. That's what sparked me to want to call you, do this podcast, because I watched your episode on the Athenian owl. We'll link that in the show notes. It's a beautiful coin. The Greek coins were just like so well, artistically interesting. And there's a couple other cities like I'm not going to be able to pronounce it, of course. So is it G?
Yeah, Yeah, you have Aegina as well.
Thank you.
And actually, the case of Aegina and Athens is really interesting. Not only because they produced coins very early on, and they produced lots of them, and they were recognizable, but also you can follow the evolution of Greek art by looking at the coins. It's really impressive. So, for example, the Athenian owl. You can see a clear transition between the archaic period and its typical art, the classical period, and even all the way down to the Hellenistic period. You have a version of the Athenian owl of the archaic, the classical, and the Hellenistic period, and the coins follow the artistic style of that time.
Okay.
It's really impressive, and it reinforces how important coins were for the propaganda of the city, because whoever was making the dice was definitely someone who was updated about the proper, what was the fashion of the time.
Yeah.
And they were putting that on the coins.
Yeah, you were probably a good artist that was, these are smaller communities. We don't, in other countries now that we have millions of people, we don't think about who the artist is for our quarters. But in these days, that would have been somebody maybe well known that did the art. And I know they're pretty beautiful. So sometimes you see more modern coins. I shouldn't say modern, but, Middle Ages or even just in the early ADs. And they're not as beautiful as some of these ancient Greek ones. Just the detail's amazing.
Exactly. Some of the engravers were so famous that they actually signed the dice.
Oh.
The case of Syracuse is very famous because some of their coins are just incredible.
Yeah, let's talk about
all
those.
metals. Yeah, they have this tradition of making wonderful coins from the very beginning. And apparently, we don't know if they hired these artists or if they were from Syracuse. So you have people such as Kimon, Ewainitos, and we know the name of these guys because when they made the dice, they actually put their little signatures. You can read Kimon or Ewainitos, or there's some other artists. So you can see that there was a thing of prestige in the coins, that maybe city-states would hire famous engravers to come and make the dice for that city. So there's another cool example. For example, Olympia, where the ancient Olympic Games were held. They would also hire different engravers for each of the Olympics and make dice for these particular games, because we see this very distinct difference between every single issue made every 4 years when the Olympic Games were held. So you would see a very distinct difference in the style of each Olympic game. So it's probable that they hired, because it was a small city, so they probably didn't justify to have like all of the stuff to make coins to have a big mint. So when it was time for the Olympics, they knew they would have a lot of people coming up. Trading coins was a very profitable thing for the state. So they probably hired engravers that came from wherever parts of the Greek world to make the dice for that specific Olympic. And I am, because people back then were not very different from us. I am 100% sure some people who went to the Olympics just saw these coins and they were like, oh, I'm going to bring that back home as a souvenir.
Of course. I was thinking the same thing. There's like souvenirs, 100%. We do it now, right? I just came back. I've been to Spain a bunch of times now, so it's not as, look at these cool coins. But, I always keep some of my euros to show and look at. And, it's definitely cool to look at different money from different parts of different countries.
Yeah, I've been to Egypt a couple of years ago, and I came back I took some Egyptian bills, and I just keep here. I don't even collect the bills, but it's just so interesting. And
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure people back then did the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of like a promotional item, like a souvenir item. That's really cool. So we talked about I'm the worst at, what's Aegina? Aegina,
yes,
right?
Aegina.
So their coin was a really cool turtle, right?
Yes, they're probably one of the very first purebred city-states who issued their own coins. So since they're in the Aegean Sea, right between the Greek mainland and the western coast of Anatolia, where coins were invented, it's very likely that some Aegean merchants in the 550s BC got in contact with this new thing, coins, from the Lydians, and they were like, oh, how about we issue our own? And they picked this lovely design of a sea turtle, and they struck this design for many centuries. In fact, there's an interesting evolution in the coinage of Aegina, because at first they have a sea turtle, it looks like very rough, and then they refine the design, and after a few centuries, they decide to change it to a tortoise, so like this land turtle. Okay. So there's even like an evolution. But the thing is, they loved turtles, and for centuries, they put turtles in their coins.
And Aegina is pretty close to Athens, so maybe they did it first, do people think, and then Athens was next, or they're sort of all at the same time? We don't really know.
Yeah, the first Athenian coins, because they issued a different kind of coin before the owl.
Okay.
These very first coins, they have a name in German, it's like Wappenmünzen. And these coins are generally considered to be contemporary to the Aegean staters.
Okay.
So it's probable that at the same time, the most important and most active ports in the Greek sphere, they realize these things, these coins, and they're just, let's all strike our own. Okay.
So if we stay in the Mediterranean, we talked about this, and we won't have to go off on a crazy tangent, but how about the Romans? The Romans didn't really have a coin like this as such. Okay, amigos, sorry, but we're going to leave it with a cliffhanger here. In the next episode, Leo will tell us about the Roman coins, and we're going to also just move around the world, and we discuss coins from the rest of the world. So tune in next time, and thank you very much, everybody. You know I appreciate all the longtime listeners, the longtime Patreons. All I ask for Christmas and forever is for y'all to please like the podcast and give us reviews. It really helps. It's all I really need. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate you, as you know. Thank you.